Welcome to Pro Practice, your guide to piano mastery. I'm Josh Wright, and today's tutorial is based on the first movement of Sonatine by Maurice Ravel. This gorgeous piece has been requested by many of you, so I'm so happy to be making this tutorial today. Before we get started with the tutorial portion of today's video, I thought I would go ahead and play the first section, the first 28 bars, and then we'll dive into some background on the piece and get into the tutorial. Okay, and then it repeats, and we can do some different interpretation the second time through. We'll talk about that. Before we get started, I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on this piece. First of all, look at the motivic development. Tee-dum. You're going to see that ta-dum, these falling fourths and rising fifths, and you can see that throughout the piece. So if you look at the beginning of the second movement, ta-dum, we see that rising fifth that we just saw in the first movement. And then if you even look at the third movement, how does he start the melody? Rising fourth. So that's an interesting little thing just to keep your eye on as you play through this. How does he use those motifs throughout the piece? Now, this is an interesting work as well because this isn't as difficult as some of his other works like Jadot or Miroirs or Gaspard de la Nuit. But it still offers every performer, whether this is kind of at the top end of your technical ability or this is a lot easier and you've played some of those more difficult works. Technically, it's up to you to determine where this piece falls. But musically, this is very tough. Opening that is always a little scary. It's very much like Ondine. Can you really make a controlled little shimmering effect? Same thing with these inner voices. All right. The way this piece came about is quite interesting. There was a composition contest sponsored by a magazine called the Weekly Critical Review, and they said, write a first movement of a sonata in F sharp minor, not to exceed 75 bars. Apparently, Ravel submitted his under a pseudonym, Verla rather than Ravel, and he was the only submission. And he went over the 75-bar limit just by a few bars, and they scrapped the whole competition later on. They kept pushing it off, then they're like, we're not doing this. So luckily, we got this gorgeous piece. The reception of the piece was a little bit mixed. At the beginning of when he published this, there were some critics that said, you know, it's not musically significant or it leaves me feeling a little bit cold. However, it got much greater reception as time went on, and it's one of his most beloved pieces. In no small part, I think, to the fact that this is approachable for pianists that aren't extremely advanced. The third movement does get a little bit more tough, but this can be approached by an early or mid-advanced student. Of course, levels are subjective in piano, but you don't have to be a concert pianist in order to play this, which I think you do for Gaspard. So Very beloved piece. The world premiere was in Lyon in 1906 on March 10th. It was originally written in 1903, but the first movement was in 1903, and then he wrote the other two movements, and it was published in 1905. 53,000 copies were run during his lifetime, so very loved, sold really well. Let's talk about opening the piece. This is a little scary because you have to have that really sigh, and you don't want to be in your face. So a little bit of time is fine to settle in. But one thing I hate about some recordings, by the way, recordings, listen to as many as you can get your hands on. Of course, there's iconic ones like Martha Argerich. I always like to listen to her Ravel. Whether you agree with Argerich's interpretation is up to you, but she always does very intentional and interesting things with her rubato, very clear with voicing, and she always has this yearning effect in her pieces, rushing ahead and then pulling back. It's very special. So, but I've listened to maybe last night, in prep for this tutorial, I listened to 10 or 12 different recordings of very well-known pianists, and each of them had a little something different to say. So make sure that you do your research and listen carefully to find out what you prefer and what you don't want to do. Sometimes listening to a recording that you don't like is just as helpful as listening to one that you do like, because you find things that you don't want to do. Diving into a little interpretive thought, don't have this take too much time. And then this is a tornado that starts stirring. Just be gentle with this opening. He writes, and I don't speak French, so I'm just going to do the English translation, very soft and expressive. And doux, I think is how you say it, D-O-U-X, can also be interpreted as sweetly. So sweetly and soft and expressive. So don't get too rambunctious right away. We're going to have it open up in measure 5 to a mezzo forte, so be quite soft. And just have that stay down in the keys. That's and a slightly flatter finger, that really helps. So one interesting thing, big thanks to Susan Dohlmeyer, my lifelong teacher, and I played this for about a month ago. I like to play these pieces before I make these tutorials for her. And she said, how are we going to end that first phrase? Are you going to go to the end? Because he does write a hairpin opening up to the end of the phrase. And then he writes subito pianissimo. And I was like, yeah, we definitely don't want to do that. But she said one thing that I probably would not do is back away too much. A lot of students get kind of cute with this. They go, and then you have no place to suddenly get soft. You've already got soft. You've already become soft. There's a controversial topic by Seymour Bernstein. He wrote this great book about interpreting Chopin symbols, and some people agree with this, some people don't, but I like this concept. So as a hairpin opens up, you don't have to only interpret that as getting louder. In fact, you can interpret it as getting louder or taking a little more time as the hairpin gets bigger, or both. And I think in this case, I wouldn't drive to the end. I wouldn't back away too much. But I think taking a little time, and Ravel himself wrote 30-second notes, and then he wrote a triplet. So he kind of wrote in a slowing down with that triplet versus the quadruplets that he had right before. And then a little bit of time. He writes an accent here. And do we really want to smack that on a subito pianissimo? Probably not. So I think that's an accent in time. A little exercise just to get you started, and then I want to talk about hand redistributions, is playing the melody loud and legato, and then the other voices pianissimo. That's very, very helpful to voice it that way. To do that exercise to help you voice it in a very pleasing manner like that. Okay, a couple of ideas with hand redistributions. I've taught this piece a few times in the past, and students always struggle with this opening because Ravel wrote it in quite an awkward way. Starting in bar 2, here you have this fifth in the left hand, but then I got to get up to that F sharp right away. And students end up being kind of clunky and not voicing very well. If you just do a few easy distributions, redistributing one note in the left hand up into the right hand, it will make the technique so much more fluid. Here we go. So halfway through bar 2, on this A and D in the left hand and the D in the right, so on the second beat there, instead of doing that, I'm just going to take 5-2 in my right. So I'll take the fifth in the left on the and of 1. But here, I'm going to take 5-2 in the right. So I'm just redistributing like that. Rather than this, I'm going to go here. And I'll also do that here. Rather than taking this fifth right here and then having to jump up to this G sharp, you know, the hands are always clashing if you're not careful. So 5-2. Those are the only redistributions, but man, it makes such a difference. And it makes it so much easier. Okay? One last idea before we get off the first line is making sure that you shape into there. Because we're using mostly 4 and 5 on the tops, 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. If you're doing that redistributed fingering, you're going to want to do 5, 2, 1, 5, 1, 5. Make sure it doesn't sound vertical like that. So one more time. Now this time you can open up a little bit more to there. Maybe a little less. Go all the way to forte. Really delicious rolls. Very savory. Don't rush them. Enjoy those. Okay. And let me give you the fingering on the first line. I also forgot to do that with the new redistributed fingering. 3-1, 5-1, 1-1, 5-1, 4-3, because you're redistributing. You can just do that single note, and then 1-3, 5-2, 1-2, 5-1, 3-1. Okay, so starting in bar 2, one more time. 5-1, 4-3, and then 1-3, 2-1, 5-1, 3-1. So that'll take care of your fingering on the first line. Here I also like 5-1, 3-1, 4-1, 2-1, 1-2-1, 1-2-1, and then 4-1, 5-1, 5-2, 1-2-1, and then 5-2-1, 5-1, 5-1, 2-1, 3-1-2-1, 5. Another option in that third bar, some students, especially those with smaller hands, might find it more comfortable to do 5-1-2-1, 4-1-2-1, or even 5-1-2-1, 5-1-3-1. Sometimes that closed hand position is a little bit easier to navigate. 5-1-2-1, 3-1-2-1, 5-1-2. So you can also let this breathe a little. Take time. Then if you take time and don't rush like a maniac through that, which I heard in certain recordings, it provides momentum for the next line. So this is just a little energy bubbling underneath. And again, just staying down in the keys, slightly flatter fingers. Don't lift the keys all the way up. That should help stay soft. So even as we're approaching the mezzo forte in line 2, or in bar 5, even right here, as I'm really projecting here, it sounds good to not really let that get too rambunctious. So I want to vary that as well. So the first time, maybe I go to there. I do the same type of shape, but maybe I take a little more time. The first time, it was just da-da-da-dum. And this second time, ya-da-da-da-da-dum. So maybe a little bit of time there at the beginning of 9. And I like to tease the audience a little bit there with time as well. Oh, time, then arrive. It's like we're going for it and then it falls, and then we're going for it and it arrives. So, and then you'll also notice this is a very bright piano. I use a heavy amount of una corda pedal. If you're on a really velvety, soft piano, you may not need to use as much una corda pedal. That's the far left pedal that shifts your keyboard over, so you're not hitting all 3 strings. But you can still see I'm projecting through that una corda pedal. One last idea. Students often struggle with those quick back and forth motions.